You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. My co-host today is Michelle Jewel Shaw, award-winning volunteer and chairperson of Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Jeremy, and hello to all of our listeners out there.
Today is April 2nd, 2023, and this is episode 219 of Lighthearted. In a few minutes, we'll hear a conversation I had with Jack and Tobi Graham, who have served as live-in lighthouse docents and caretakers at a number of locations. This will be part one of a two-part interview. Before we get to that, I want to remind people about the U.S. Lighthouse Society's tours happening this year.
Yes, there are 4 domestic tours scheduled: Long Island, New York in May, Northern Lake Michigan in July, the Northern Maine coast and New Brunswick, Canada in October, and Northern California in August. There's still room available on all of these tours.
Yep, I'll be leading the Long Island, New York tour in May. I'll probably be taking part in a couple of the other ones. There are also 4 international tours coming up. The Iceland tour in June is full, and so is the Spain tour in September, but there's still room on a Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island tour in August and a Patagonia tour in November.
You can get more details on all these tours on the Society's website at uslhs.org.
So, Michelle, let's tell everyone about today's guests, Jack and Tobi Graham.
Sure, Jeremy. John T. Graham, known to most people as Jack Graham, was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. A retired Pennsylvania State Park manager, he's been an active volunteer in many areas of state and national history.
Jack is also an old-time storyteller who performs as Pennsylvania Jack. As Pennsylvania Jack, he has performed at events at the State Museum in Harrisburg and at many other venues and events. He even won a blue ribbon at the Perry County Fair. You can find out more about Pennsylvania Jack online at PAJack, that's PAJACK.com.
Jack is a longtime lighthouse aficionado who has written many articles, around 50 in all, for the U.S. Lighthouse Society's quarterly journal, The Keeper's Log, and for Lighthouse Digest magazine. His articles often deal with overlooked but interesting aspects of lighthouse history and construction, like ironwork and stairways, Fresnel lenses, oil houses, and even privies, as well as biographical sketches of important historical personalities.
Jack's wife, Tobi Graham, grew up in West Orange, New Jersey. Her family spent summers on the Jersey Shore within sight of Barnegat Lighthouse. Tobi taught both art and French in grades K through 12 for many years. She's an accomplished photographer and uses her photos to give illustrated talks on wildflowers and herbs, and more recently to accompany Jack's articles on lighthouse topics.
Always interested in history, Jack and Tobi joined a Revolutionary War reenactment group in 1976, making and wearing period uniforms and clothing, and were active in living history events for many years. While Jack was the manager at Ridley Creek State Park in Media, Pennsylvania, the entire family served as active members of the docent staff of the Colonial Pennsylvania Plantation, which is its 1700s living history farm.
Jack and Tobi married in 1970 and have a son and daughter, both of whom also have a son and a daughter. Since 2005, Jack and Tobi have served as lighthouse caretakers at sites throughout the United States, 17 locations in all.
The places they've lived have included the historic light stations at Seguin Island and Little River Island in Maine, several in Michigan, Piney Point in Maryland, Cape Lookout in North Carolina, and even Swallowtail Light Station in New Brunswick, Canada.
I had the pleasure of speaking with Tobi and Jack recently via Zoom. There was a lot of ground to cover, and we split the interview into 2 parts. Part 2 will be heard next week. Let's listen to part 1 of our conversation now. I'm speaking this afternoon with Jack and Tobi Graham. We are speaking through the magic of Zoom, and we're going to talk mainly about Jack and Tobi's involvement with lighthouses. So thank you so much for joining me today, Tobi and Jack. I really appreciate it.
I'm happy to be here.
Before we get into lighthouses, that's the main topic for today, but we are going to touch on some other things. And first of all, Jack, let me ask you, I'd like to know maybe a little bit more about your background. I understand you grew up a little bit away from the ocean in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Is that correct?
Quite a ways from the ocean, although we did go to Lake Erie and our parents told us that was the ocean.
Okay. Well, it's pretty, it looks like an ocean when you're there.
We know. I don't think I saw an actual real lighthouse till I was probably on our honeymoon up in New England, when we were married. We went up that way. Before that, I don't think I had ever really seen one, Although we had been to the city of Erie, we didn't really pay any attention to the few that are up there. So, I'm a city boy by all means. Right?
Uh-huh. And you had, I believe, a long association with Pennsylvania State Parks. Is that correct?
38 years. Most of that spent as a site manager at 4 different parks over the years. I also spent a lot of time in administrative positions, budgeting, labor relations. I was always involved in training, particularly public service, park ranger training, those kinds of things. So, I had a very, very long career with the Department of Conservation Natural Resources in Pennsylvania. I'm a forester by education. And when I started in the system, basically park managers were foresters, as the parks had pretty much evolved from the state forest of Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
Sooner or later, they came up with park and rec curriculums, but I predate that.
Okay. So I do want to talk more about the parks related stuff in a few minutes. But first of all, let me ask you, Tobi. You're originally from New Jersey. Was it West Orange, New Jersey, right? Isn't that where the Edison Historical Park is?
Yep.
Yeah, my wife and I have been there. That was really interesting. I very much enjoyed that. So you're from New Jersey and Jack's from Pennsylvania. How did the two of you meet?
Actually, we've known each other for 62 years. And in the fall of 61, I began my career at Wilson College in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And Jack was at the Lighthouse campus, the forestry campus of Penn State. At that time, Wilson was all women and Penn State was all men. So in order to get us together, they held what were called mixers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the very first weekend in October, our mixer was with Mont Alto. We called them the Chop Chop Boys at the time, at any rate. And they came and we had a barbecue followed by a campus-wide scavenger hunt.
Okay.
And Jack and I ended up on the same scavenger hunt team. The story goes on rather interesting that we got along fine. The next weekend, he decided he wanted to come back and see me, but he couldn't remember my name. Unfortunately, his roommate had taken a shine to my roommate, and he remembered her name. So they worked up this scheme where they would come together to our dorm. Chuck, what's his name, would ask for my roommate, and then ask if I was free. And they figured out once I was there, somebody would remember what my name was. But he came back again the next weekend, and he has kept coming back. He even found me in Spain when he was in the army, and I was visiting. He was in Thailand, and I was visiting my sister in Spain. And he just kept coming back and coming back and coming back. So
yeah,
finally, yeah.
And he wore you down. Yeah, yeah. That story reminds me. There was an episode of the show Seinfeld that was like that, where he was dating a woman and couldn't remember her name, and he kept trying to subtly guess her name. So, Tobi, I know you're an accomplished photographer, and I was reading you give or you have given illustrated talks on wildflowers and herbs. Is that correct?
Wildflowers and herbs was one of my mother's passions, and because my father being a photographer, I took with the photography. So I would follow along with, even from a very young age, and take pictures of all the wildflowers along the way while he was looking at the cows and the scenery around. And finally, having married someone in parks, we began to lay out trails and more wildflowers. I took more and more pictures of them and learned about them, and it was a natural thing to do. I haven't done it for several years here, but that's what I started. I did when we were at Seguin, I did make a notebook of all the wildflowers from May through September up there with the photographs illustrating them.
That's kind of in the tradition of some of the lighthouse keepers and wives who were kind of naturalists.
Really? Yeah, I mean, that's what you had. You ate it, used it for medicine.
Yeah, yeah. Also, the field of historical reenactments is something both of you have been involved with over the years. And I believe for a while, the entire family volunteered as docents, right? At the Colonial Pennsylvania plantation. So
Yeah,
17,
both
yes.
of us and our two kids were very active there.
It was on the property of Ridley Creek State Park.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And we joined there as volunteers and did everything, but from giving tours to special occasions, parties, I mean, everything that we could possibly have done there in colonial costume.
Uh-huh. And
I
you
hate to
made,
call it
you made,
costume, we have to call it period.
Period dress, not
Period
costumes,
dress.
right?
yeah, yeah. And you made those period
Yes,
dress?
yeah, and I made them for most of the women there. I
Mm-hmm.
had done clothing of that period for the Revolutionary War group that we had joined during the bicentennial. And I
Mm-hmm.
had a lot of patterns and made more patterns and yeah, did a lot of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
That's-
creative.
I guess so. Yeah, that's fantastic. So, Jack, you've done a lot of storytelling, right? At various places, events over the years. And as a storyteller, you're known as Pennsylvania Jack.
That's correct.
So how did all that develop?
Well, I like to tell people that as a father, I'm very fond of telling bedtime stories to my children. And as children do, of course, they grow up and they no longer had time for dad's silly stories. But dad wasn't done telling them yet. So I, in addition to simply writing them, I started collecting tales as I went along, particularly from the Appalachian settlers. The early Davy Crockett, Mike Fink are two of my favorite characters for telling tales about. And mentioned that to somebody and will come over and tell us some stories. And that sort of launched that direction. And I'm fairly active. I probably do a storytelling gig once a month, obviously historical groups, park societies, old folks' homes,
Mm-hmm.
those kinds of things. And it's
Yeah.
been a fun sideline of my activities.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, I just had a gig yesterday with one of the local historical groups here, and I have I say my story bag probably has 100 stories in it, if not more. You can read some of those on my website if someone wants to do so. I'm pretty experimental, and also I like a lot of the old tales that were passed down, and they're not all mine.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned the website. Is it PennsylvaniaJack.com? Is it
PAJack.com.
PAJack.com?
Yeah, PAJack.com. And you'll not only find 4 categories of stories, but you'll also find my Lighthouse page, which is perhaps of interest to somebody. So yeah, if someone wants to look that up, please do.
Yeah. I was looking at it. So I don't know if it's possible today because our time is somewhat limited, but this is a podcast, so it's as long as it needs to be. But I'm wondering if you can give an example of a Pennsylvania Jack story. I know they're varying lengths. Any chance you could do one or part of one at least?
I'll give you a little bit of an intro here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd like to tell you a story about a boy named Jack. Now, perhaps I like stories about a boy named Jack because that's my name, but you probably know this Jack because he's the guy that climbed that beanstalk once upon a time. And that was only one of the many adventures of Jack. Well, Jack lived with his mother and his brother Tom and his brother Will. They had a small farm out on the edge of the wilderness. It was sort of a hardscrabble farm, and they were always struggling to make do. They raised some cattle, they raised some livestock. They had a big garden. But in order to help with the food supply, Jack started running a little trap line. And he'd bring home a possum maybe once in a while, or a raccoon, or a squirrel, maybe a fox. But one day, he had a little box trap. And when he got out there, in that trap was a little itty bitty bird, probably about the size of a chickadee. Well, Jack looked at that and he said, no sense taking that home. I can't eat that. I'll just turn it loose. And just as he was about ready to do that, the bird talked to him. The bird said, oh, sir, please don't hurt me. If you'll let me go, I'll give you something real special. Jack thought I was going to let him go anyhow, so I may as well see what he's got. So he opened the trap, took that little bird out, held him in his hand, gave him a toss up into the air, and that little bird flew away. Jack thought, well, he sure pulled one over on me. But in only a minute, that bird flew back. And in his feet, he was holding this little itty bitty bag with only about this big and this way. And he dropped it right at Jack's feet. And he said, that's a magic bag. And if you want to know anything more about that magic bag, you just look up www.pajack.com.
What a tease. Wow. People listening to the podcast, I wish they could see your facial expressions and your hand gestures when you tell this story, because it's great. It's the whole deal, it's a real performance. And I'm wondering, has anybody videoed you telling some of these stories, or have you appeared on TV, anything like that?
Well, I don't know that I don't know. I guess it's sort of a low key thing, and I could probably make more of a production out of it if I wanted to. But no, I don't think so.
Well, I feel like somebody should get it on video.
And costume too, you must admit.
Oh yeah. I have my PA Jack outfit. I've got a couple different outfits.
Yeah, I wish I could. I wish I wasn't as far from Pennsylvania as I am. I'd love to see a full performance sometime.
Me up.
Yeah. Well, if you're doing New England tour, please let me know, and I'll definitely set something up for you locally for sure. Or maybe we can do something virtually sometime. Might be something to think about in the future. I'd love to talk more about that, but it's probably time we segue into lighthouses at this point. So how did the two of you, I don't know if there's a simple answer to this, but how did the two of you get interested in lighthouses in the first place?
Well, we visited a couple of lighthouses as tourists, of course, as everybody else does. And
we took our children every summer to someplace at different countries.
Tobi grew up near Barnegat Light, so that she remembers playing in there when it was an abandoned lighthouse for so many years.
Part of the scenery, and it was a place to go and swim in the ocean. That was it. At that point, it was closed and kind of fallen apart. But the light shone. And from our house, you could see that light every night. They have since said no, it hadn't been lit for years, but my cousins used to come and visit us all summer and finally bought a place there too. We saw it every night. I think it had some influence.
Yeah.
I'll bet it did. Yeah.
Probably what got us involved in the lighthouses, we were on a flight up to New England to visit some neighbors. And we pulled the airline magazine out of the pouch, and it had a little article about offbeat vacations, looking for people to run a dude ranch in Wyoming and help
take care of
a dairy farm in Wisconsin. And there was one that wanted a compatible couple to spend the summer on an island off the coast of Maine, which turned out to be Seguin Island. And unknown to each other, we secretly tore that article out of the magazine and brought it home and talked about it. And it was just time-wise, was about a year and a half before I was going to retire, before we were both going to retire.
They wanted it.
And they always try to pick somebody a year or two ahead of time. So the timeline just fit in. We come home, we spent the whole weekend writing up an application. Don't think I ever spent that much time on a job application as we did on that one for Seguin, and mailed it off. And we got a call from Ann Webster about 3 days later and said, "Can you come up for an interview?" So we drove to Bath in the worst storm of that winter, and were interviewed, and they said, "You got the job." So that was the summer of 2005. We were actually about a year ahead of time when they selected us. We like to jokingly say we hardly knew an outhouse from a lighthouse from an outhouse at the time, but Seguin is just a wonderful, magical island.
Absolutely.
I know you've been there.
Yeah.
And we've left a little bit of ourselves at Seguin and brought a little bit of it home with us. So
I see that. For the people who can't see it, you're wearing a Friends of Seguin Island t-shirt right now. So can you say a little bit more about what that was like at Seguin? What did you do basically? What was it like living there?
You used the word, let me just interject here. You used the word caretaker a lot. I don't really like that word. Okay.
Apropos at Seguin.
Yes, we had responsibilities for the property, but I like to think we were more hosts and docents, and maybe you did a little caretaking and maintenance and volunteer. I mean, as a volunteer, there's always jobs that need done.
I think we need to make up a new word to describe this, because there's not one word that encompasses it all. People use the word keepers a lot for people like doing what you did. I tend to be a purist in that, to me, a keeper was somebody who was employed by the government to keep that light.
Yeah. Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
But in a sense, in those positions, you are modern day keepers, really, in many ways.
Yeah. Seguin probably was more of a caretaking position than others because there was maintenance to do.
It was everything. You did everything from clearing trails and
feeding the visitors and showing them around.
It was
pumping water into the
cisterns.
into the cisterns.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a garden for our own vegetables to grow our own things, and I grew lettuce and nasturtiums in the window boxes instead of flowers because we could eat those. There was always something to be done, and nothing was done easy.
Yeah.
When once a week we got to go to town if the sea cooperated and the waters was running in front of the cove. You had to come into a cove, and if the ocean was going into the cove at the same time,
Yep.
and you couldn't get out, that meant no town that week.
Yeah.
And
It was for as
It was
hard a
nice.
place as it is to get to. It was a very busy place.
yeah,
You know, I think over
constant.
the course of the summer we were there, we had like 3,000 visitors, which doesn't sound like a lot compared to some places, but it was regular. I mean, there were the people that were there at daybreak to watch the sun come up. You know, the people that were the birders, the people that actually wanted to know about the lighthouse, and there were some of those.
Mhm.
And there were the boats that would get stuck in a storm and couldn't get out of the cove and would come and spend several days
Yeah,
with
we had
us.
several families that
And,
spent days with us
days
because
with-
they couldn't leave. You know.
Mhm.
We made them play games with us and stretched out the meals for two to fit everybody. And it was kind
Yeah.
of fun to have
Yeah.
company.
We got
Yeah.
involved with a rescue of a boat that was lost in the fog that was trying to call the Coast Guard and had no idea of radio protocol or who they were talking to or anything else. And it just so happened we were able to patch through between them and the Coast Guard because the Coast Guard couldn't hear them.
But we had a Coast Guard radio.
And,
Yeah.
you know, and we sort of coordinated the Coast Guard coming out and rescuing them in the middle of the night, which was an interesting experience.
I'll bet. Yeah.
But it was a learning experience in many ways. I didn't want to have to take our laundry to town. It seemed to be a waste of time. We'd go to the library and have lunch in town and stop, pick up mail and do a little shopping. So what we did for the laundry, which is, I don't know if they still do it or not, but I know several keepers after us said, what a great idea. I'd fill the bathtub full of water, put in the soap, put the clothes in, let them soak overnight. Then the next morning I would get in and take a shower and tramp up and down on the clothes. Again, let the water out, let them go, and Jack would wring them out, and then we go out and hang them out. Now, sometimes they would dry in one day if there was a lot of wind. Otherwise, it was so wet they might hang there for 3 or 4 days. But we always brought in our private laundry and hung it up in the hallway. And so all these little things about, what do you do in these different than what we were used to, running the washing machine twice a day.
Yeah.
But just for one example.
Did your laundry ever blow into the ocean?
No,
I
that
don't think we lost anything.
No, that we didn't.
Used lots of clothespins.
Yeah.
Doing things differently, but again, we had the Hyde School came out, and we had those youngsters with us for I guess about a couple of weeks. I guess it was. They cleaned up the old brick from the old chimneys and built a path that went up to the lighthouse. But the most fun was at the end of their stays, we would take them up in the lighthouse at night, which was again magical. Tell them ghost stories while we were up there,
Mhm.
and then bring them down again into the museum where all the old keepers' portraits hung, etc., and tell them more ghost stories and have popcorn and lemonade. But they went down that hill back to the campground down at the bottom where they stayed, never came out of their tents all night long.
Because of the ghost stories.
Exactly.
These were high school kids.
Yeah, high school kids, yeah. And then the
Mhm.
next morning,
Macho.
they all went over to hunt for the rock where Jack had told him a fellow cut his arm off and it
Yeah.
bled all
Ah.
over. There were red iron ore in the rocks, and of course they found those, and they were very excited about that. But
Wow.
we had a lot of fun other ways. We had a lot of family and friends come to visit and put them to work.
Perhaps the first story I ever wrote about lighthouses was my fictional encounter with the ghost. I'm sure you're familiar with the piano story from Seguin.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Well, this is my tale of having met the keeper who did that. You know, sitting down on the shore in what they call Cobblestone Cove, and there is a couple of, I'm not sure what the chemical of the rock is,
The
but they
iron.
have iron streaks in them, so they look like blood-stained rocks. You know? And this was the site of where I met the keeper who had chopped his hand off, you know, when he killed. It was the one version says the keeper killed himself too. The other, there's 4 or 5 versions of this story. There's also that it didn't even happen at Seguin and happened on Pond Island. So
Yes, I've heard that too.
pick your
Yeah.
version, you know.
Yeah.
We had a lot of fun there. We flew kites from up on the walkway.
That's a tradition
Cat-
we've done almost everywhere we've gone.
Lighthouse, yeah.
We've taken a kite and flown it off the balcony of the lighthouse.
Oh, cool. Neat.
Also,
Um,
at night, we found that we could make hand shadow puppets on the island.
Well, almost.
I was going to ask you about that. Of course, Seguin has the only first order Fresnel lens still operating in northern New England, and it's pretty spectacular at night. You must have really enjoyed that going out at
It
night.
was.
With the new optic in there, I think I emailed you that little thing. The magic is gone. It used to be like standing under this umbrella, and it wasn't the rays coming out from the light. It was dark panels. It was like spokesman umbrella.
Yes.
And I've never figured out exactly what created that, but it was just a amazingly.
Astragals separating the panes of glass in the lantern.
There were more streaks than there were astragals around the lantern.
Yeah, we've seen other pictures of other lighthouses with the lens that.
Yeah,
that
so I've never quite figured out the numerics of it, you know. I think that's a 12-sided lamp. I don't remember the number anymore, but there were more of these streaks than there were astragals.
Interesting.
In the lantern.
Maybe the ghost was playing a role in that somehow.
At one point, we had a film crew that came out to film a whole other topic, but they painted with light on the outside of the lighthouse at night, and that was just incredible. There was just so many things that's a win to remember.
It's the only place we've been all summer long. Most of the other places we've been a month or two at the most, you know, and that was partially on our choice rather than, you know, they're all different as to how long these places want volunteers for. Some are fortunate to have a lot of candidates and they can divvy it up. I still remember the first time we went to Little River. I don't know if you know Terry Rowden up at Little River.
I do.
Okay, well, we get up there and his wife said, "Thank God you're here. I can go get my gallbladder out now." As they handed us the key, right? You know?
Yeah.
So,
No, I know them pretty well, the Rods. They're great. We could just talk about Seguin for hours. I think there's so much, but you've been at so many places. I don't think we have time to touch on every one of them individually today. But let me ask you a general question. I know that at some of the places where you've been, whether you want to call it caretakers, docents, live-in docents, modern day keepers. Some of these places you've actually portrayed a lighthouse keeper and his wife in costume and everything. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, we think that's important. We were used to doing our tours, et cetera, at the plantation in first person, but it allows us to take the people back to the period when you're dressed, you're speaking, and because so many of the houses in the outbuildings have been removed, there are many people who assume that there was one keeper and he lived in the light tower itself. This way, I can talk more about the domestic side. I talk about the families, how the children were educated, and try to paint a picture of what the place looked like when the keepers were actually there, what the outbuildings were, that there were actually horses and cows and everything else there that made up boathouses, things that now are gone, and all you see is a tower. So in first person and in costume, I feel like I can take the people back and have them understand more about what it really was like, rather than just one tall tower and one man out there lonely, going nuts, keeping the place myself.
Yeah. No, you're right. There's a misconception I think a lot of people have. They picture it's kind of the cliched image of a lighthouse keeper, an old guy with a corncob pipe, looking out to sea, leading a lonely life by himself and living in the lighthouse. I hear that a lot. People do think that the keepers always lived inside the lighthouse tower, which they did in some cases.
Some places, yes. Some places they did. Sure.
But on the mainland or larger islands, they had separate keepers' houses, and the keepers.
So much more to it than that.
Yes,
and of course, once you're in period clothing, then you can do more first person instead of saying they did such and such. It's I do this every morning. My husband goes up and lights the light, cleans the windows in the morning. All that kind of thing can be told to put them more into the story, I think.
Yeah. I think any places where they can do that sort of thing, I think it's a big advantage.
The first place we got into uniforms, because we really hadn't thought about it, was at Split Rock.
Yeah,
Split Rock, of course, has quite an extensive staff. And there, rather than being the docents, we were a part of a much larger crew. And they provide keepers' uniforms for all of their male docents. And at the time, I told Lee, he's got too many Ks walking around. He needs a couple ones and twos and threes,
Right.
And the ladies on the staff were provided with stuff.
Not the guides, but the women in the kitchen.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
The keepers, in the first keeper's
Right,
house.
yeah.
And
That sort of got us interested afterwards, saying, hey, that was fun, being dressed, we could do that, and we were comfortable with that. And, you try to learn a little bit about a couple specific keepers.
at Split Rock, I was in the kitchen, and these women dressed as the keepers or as the housekeeper, as the wives, didn't do any first person. And that's one of the reasons they wanted us to come to do it. I quilted a whole quilt on the treadle sewing machine while talking to visitors at one point. Just sat there and kept talking and doing what I was doing. Every morning we'd put coffee pot on and put a little bacon and things on the stove and start it up on the wood stove, yeah.
Wood, right?
So that it smelled like it was being lived in. Jack would come over at lunchtime. We'd take the old phonograph and we'd dance in the living room together. And this kind of do things. One of his favorite things to do, we had a camera from that period because Jack had collected cameras, and he'd get the people to stand on the porch and tell them that he had to send these pictures
into headquarters,
to show how many visitors we had. And they would pose. Of course, there was no film in the camera, but they would pose and ask if they could get copies and try to get them into this also, into the period more, whatever we could do.
Yeah.
To do that. In the afternoon, we actually baked and let the visitors taste different cakes and cookies and various things, have the stove going. So we have made so many friends that we still have there at Split Rock. And I like to think that we improved their program in the kitchen, at least.
I don't know if you ever knew a guy named Tobi. Terry was their education director for many years and was actually the person that we communicated with and got us to Split Rock to begin with. And he unfortunately passed away soon after he retired, but he was just a wonderful addition and component of that whole Split Rock education program up there.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I never knew him, but I know Lee Radzak. I've known him for a long time. And I just visited Split Rock Lighthouse for the first time about a year ago.
Oh.
And of course, it's one of the great iconic lighthouses.
Absolutely.
It's elegant.
Yeah, that setting on that bluff is so beautiful, so dramatic. And it's a big tourist attraction. So what was it like living there at such a place that was so iconic?
That was one of the two places, Jeremy, that we did not actually live. We have been very successful at finding places that provide on-site lodging, typically in the keeper's house. Split Rock did not.
Okay.
But we still wanted to go there very, very much. So we actually rented a small place down the road. So we sort of commuted to work at Split Rock.
Since it was summertime, all the ski resorts around had their cabins.
So even though they have 3 houses there, the first one, of course, is their museum open for part of their tours. The second one, Lee and his family lived in. And the third one at that time was just sort of, we want to do something with this someday.
It still looked the way that the Coast Guard had left it. So.
One that had been obviously a coast. So they didn't provide any lodgings. We didn't actually live at Split Rock. A little different than that. The Split Rock and Cape Mears were actually the only two that we haven't had a place right there.
Yeah.
To live at.
Yeah.
Lee probably was instrumental in getting me into some of my research, because one of the articles I've done has been on curtains around the lens, and Split Rock has pulled on shades. Well, I was very familiar with curtains in other places, and I came to this lighthouse that has shades. Well, first of all, it's much newer, 1910. And I thought, well, maybe by then they went to shades. And I asked Lee, are these original, or did there used to be curtains? Well, he says, there's the files, go look. So he pretty much gave me access to a lot of the files, and that was a lot of the research that started me off on that whole article about the covers and curtains and stuff. So I give Lee some credit for instigating my lighthouse research, or at least facilitating it.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, for people who might not know, Lee Radzak was the longtime live-in caretaker / keeper of Split Rock Lighthouse for like 36 years. He retired not long ago, and he's been on the podcast a couple of times, but a great guy, did a tremendous job there. And he wrote a recent book about his life there at Split Rock, and I think you wrote a review of that book.
Wonderful.
Yeah, the two of us did a review.
Beautiful
of that.
illustrations and just a wonderful story.
Just a must-have book, we tell people. If you're into lighthouses at all, Lee's book is just a treasure of that experience.
I completely agree. Again, any one of these lighthouses we could talk endlessly about, but you were at a bunch of lighthouses in Michigan over the years, and we don't have time to talk about every single one of them, but which ones especially stand out when you look back at them?
Well, we have to tell you about Ontonagon.
Mm-hmm.
Ontonagon is a different kind of lighthouse for many reasons. First, it's a schoolhouse type thing.
It's up on Lake Superior, yeah.
Has the tower attached to the house. It marked the entrance to the river where the ships came down to load their logs. They were coming down the river. Logs and copper, yeah. And so the building used to be right at the end. It had a pier that went out from it, and the land has filled in. So it's quite a way now from the lake, but still on the river. And we went there wearing first-person costumes. And fortunately, the townspeople and those people interested in the lighthouse had found all of the keeper's original logs at a yard sale in town. And we had access to those and were able to portray the daily life of those keepers as acting out James Corrigan. And I was his second wife, Josie. Yeah. Of course, Josie never could come up, of course, to what his first wife did. I couldn't impress his uniform nearly as well as he did. I couldn't make the Irish stew the way that she did. When it came to having children, she had 4 and I only had 2. So we were in person there, and that was a really fun thing to do.
Ontonagon is owned by the County Historical Society, and it was also sort of interesting that tours started at their museum in town. So part of my duties as the host docent was to drive a little bus to transport people from town to the lighthouse, which was about a 1.5 mile trip because you had to go down the river and across a bridge and back on up kind of thing.
This is where I thank Split Rock for teaching me how to control a wood or coal burning stove, because when we wanted to go to Ontonagon, we were told they had no place for us to stay. And Jack wrote to the back and said,
"You've got a house.
You've got a house." And they said, "But that's our museum."
And I said, "So what?"
Is it furnished like it would have been back then? Yes. Does it have a bed? Yes. Okay. Is there running water? No, but there's a pump at the sink. You can pump water from there. Is there electricity? No. Well, are there any kerosene lamps? Yes. This went on and on, back and forth, and we finally said, well, how about bathroom facilities? Well, there is a toilet in the outside.
Now they have a composted toilet in the basement.
Yeah, whatever. There is there, but they got us a key to the local marina, and every morning, it was very close. We could walk over there and take showers. So
basically, we lived in the museum.
Lived in the museum. Okay. In the morning, we put away.
I like to say we were 2 more exhibits.
And as soon as our breakfast was over, I'd leave the stove going if there were going to be tours, and stick some cookies in the oven. So when the people came in the back door, they could smell cookies burning. And of course, it was always, did you cook those in that? But we had really good time playing our roles there.
Yeah. Any other Michigan lights that really stand out?
Well, South Manitou was quite interesting because, of course, on an island out in the middle of Lake Michigan.
Yeah.
And although they no longer, there is a keeper's house there, but it is just a horrible, decomposing mess. But they provided us a small building that had been part of the life-saving station at one time. So we actually were staying right, 100 yards down the path from the lighthouse, which makes it so much greater for us because we can immerse ourselves in the situation much better, obviously. Of course, it's one of the tall towers, if you will, that people sometimes refer to as the Poe lights, although I think William Reynolds gets more credit for them than Poe does if one does the research. And people would be brought out on the ferry boat, every day. So there was always an audience that wanted tours, and it was just that one stands out simply because of its location. I mean, right there on the waterfront, on the end of that island.
Yeah.
Very briefly, Osable, which is also on Lake Superior, was an earlier one, and it's a very, very complete station. It has both 2 keepers' houses, boathouse, what had been the fog signal building, which is now sort of a little museum of theirs there, and a couple oil houses, both the brick and the round oil houses that tend to be unique to the Great Lakes as far as I can see. And of course, the obligatory privy, so it
Yeah.
was probably the first complete light station we'd really been to, and we
Yeah.
learned a lot more about that operation.
Yeah.
Again, there they also had an intern, that was a national park site, and part of Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore, and but they've done a very good job of preserving and restoring that whole facility.
Mm-hmm. I was there last year, Osable, in April, and there was still a lot of snow, and it's a bit of a walk for the public to get out there.
Yes,
Through
it
a
is.
campground, yeah.
Right.
So where did you live there when you were there?
We lived on the second floor there.
In the
Okay.
The 1909 house, which is the quotes new keeper's house,
Mhm.
has an apartment on the second floor for volunteers, and the lower floor is like a little bit of a museum.
Yeah.
So the original house is connected. I think they've done a lot more restoration of the original house that
They
is
were
connected
working on
to
that
the
at
tower
the time,
since we
yeah.
were there. At the time, it was pretty much just empty.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it
We
was,
didn't get this. Yeah. It
was
wasn't
the
open when we were there, but yeah, everything certainly looks good from the outside.
The 1909 house, that was apparently the style at the time because it is
It's exactly
identical
the
to
same
the
as
three houses
Split
at
Rock.
Split Rock.
Yeah.
The identical building, the one there,
Mm.
the new one at Osable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, those three probably stand out among, asking which lighthouse is neatest is like, which your kids you like best, because they all have their own uniqueness to them. And some places have done a much better job of interpreting and knowing. One of the things that I have enjoyed about writing articles is so many places, they have a group, particularly the ones that are friends groups. They're doing a good job of keeping the place, but they know so little about it. I can still remember a question at Cape Mears. Every day they would bring a person from their friends group out to spell us at lunch. And this one gentleman asked me, "Why do you know so much about our lighthouse?"
Yeah.
And I wanted to say to him, "Why do you know so little about your lighthouse?" But I bit my tongue.
Yeah.
And I also find that even where people know a good bit about that specific site, they don't know much about the system that the lighthouses were a part of,
Mhm.
or the overriding technologies that were involved. And,
Yeah.
that's
We-
maybe I just am much more interested in digging into things than other people. So,
We
Yeah.
marvel continuously. The more things we see, the more questions we have. And it's hard sometimes to believe they were all part of the same system because everyone is different in some way or other. Even if they look the same, they are different.
Yeah.
And that's part of the fun of that we've had is comparing them and telling other people
Yeah.
about one compared to the other. And, I think we could visit every single one of what are there 600 still in this US or something.
More than 800 actually. Yeah.
800.
yeah.
Yeah, maybe 600 that are still.
Well,
They'd all be different.
Yeah, you mentioned, Seguin used to brag that we have the only first order lens north of someplace.
North of Rhode Island, I would say.
Well,
Yeah.
now Rhode Island has one, right? The one
Yeah.
that used to be at Cape Lookout, And I said to myself, is that true? Where else were the first order lenses? Which led to the one article I did on the first order lenses of the Atlantic coast. So I went down as far as Jupiter. And I said, well, why stop there? There's got to be ones, from there around to the Pacific. So one thing leads to another. I get curious about things and I want to find out.
Yeah.
And once I do, I say, well, let's
Exactly.
share it with the Lighthouse community in some way or other. And both Tim Harrison and Jeff Gales have been very nice at publishing some of the things I've sent them.
Absolutely, and you've done a tremendous job of those articles. And I just want to talk a bit more about the live-in docent positions for a little while, but I want to get into the articles shortly too. But you mentioned Cape Mears a little while ago, and the Oregon coast is just so amazing. I drove the whole West Coast by myself in 2015, and that was an incredible experience. And I found the Oregon coast to be as beautiful as any place I've ever seen.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Cape Mears is a relatively small lighthouse.
It's a tiny little giant.
It's very short. And it's also unusual in that you approach it from above.
Yes.
The houses and all the other buildings were quite a ways above. And as you walk down the path, the first part that you see is the lantern.
Yeah. I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's a walkway that comes around to now, but everything was up. It's up. Yes, it is a very short one, but it's sitting 190 feet above the ocean there, and so it doesn't need to be tall.
Right.
That was the other place where we had to rent place to stay. They had nothing there.
So we wanted to go there.
We really wanted to go there, and they talked around town, I guess, about what they were going to have somebody from afar coming out. And a school teacher thought that this was such an educational thing that she offered us for very, very inexpensively one of her beach cottages up the way, or down the way, actually.
Yeah. So.
And we were right on the beach. We could catch crabs for dinner. It was magical, more so than living there, because every morning we came along that coast and looked up, and there was the lighthouse.
Sitting on that little bluff right there above.
Again, just a magical experience. I get goosebumps thinking about it.
Yeah, that had to be
It
great.
was almost better than being right there all the
Of
time.
course, Cape Mears is one of the ones, and only the tower remains. There's a small workroom that's connected, but it
It's a gift
represents
shop
the original one, but it is not the original. So the only thing there, and I often tell people that the only reason a lot of the lighthouses themselves still remain is those things were so well built, nobody knew how to tear them down.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
I mean, that's like so many. It's a brick. Is it a brick lined lighthouse covered with metal, or is it a metal lighthouse?
Yeah.
One,
Yeah.
but it's a sturdy little thing, and it's going to be there a long, long time.
Yeah, it is sturdy. Sadly, though, the lens had something happen. Yeah.
They shot out a
I
couple
think
panels of it.
they were able to get some restoration work done after those tall fellows with the rifles, maybe to some degree. I'm not sure.
Well, a little bit, but never a full restoration. It's more money than they have there. It was a sad thing. I hated to see that. I mean, it's a beautiful lens.
On the upside, since the lens was in such poor condition, we were allowed to let the visitors get closer to it and look, and they could see how the lens would turn things upside down and have their pictures taken with everything outside. It was a good teaching tool to have a lens that was not in tip-top condition.
Yeah.
That's true. There is.
Oftentimes places don't let people up to that level at all.
Yeah.
In fact, I was just reading an article about, I forget the lighthouse now, but people cannot go near because somebody might touch it and the oils from their fingers will destroy it permanently tomorrow, kind of a thing. And they are an amazing device. I could refer to a lens as a magical light machine. I use that expression all the time. And
I like that.
And people, we're fortunate there's many places you can get a good close-up appreciation for them.
Yeah. That's a great phrase. I like to call them works of functional art, beautiful works of functional art.
Exactly. Yeah.
To find out more about Jack Graham's storytelling as Pennsylvania Jack, visit pajack.com. And you can read many of his articles in the Keeper's Log, the U.S. Lighthouse Society's quarterly journal.
I had so much fun talking with Jack and Tobi about their years of involvement with lighthouses. We'll hear part 2 next week. We're actually recording today on March 22nd, and in a few days I'll be heading out to the U.S. Lighthouse Society's headquarters at the Point No Point Light Station in the state of Washington. I'll be out there for a week working on various video and podcast projects. It's been more than 4 years since I was last out there, and it'll be nice to get back. Looking forward to seeing the staff and volunteers who work there, and also the incredibly beautiful surroundings there. It's a really beautiful part of the world.
Thanks to all the staff, volunteers, and members of the U.S. Lighthouse Society for continued support of this podcast. Go to uslhs.org to learn more about the Society's passport program, preservation grants, the research catalog, and everything else the Society offers. We also want to extend our thanks to everyone out there who is working to preserve our lighthouses and their history. We're all on the same team.
If you listen through Apple Podcasts, please rate and review us. Also, I want to remind people about the event I've mentioned in the last couple of episodes. I'm sure you remember, Michelle. We'd like to have an event on a day in August, probably close to National Lighthouse Day. We haven't set the date yet, but it'll be in early August. A date when people will gather at lighthouses everywhere and dance to the same song at the same time, kind of like a giant flash mob.
Yep.
And I'm looking for people to help coordinate all this. If you're interested in helping to coordinate it, or if you have a group that would like to participate at a lighthouse or elsewhere, please email me at jeremy@uslhs.org. Again, jeremy@uslhs.org.
The Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw once wrote, quote, "I can think of no other edifice constructed by man as altruistic as a lighthouse. They were built only to serve," end quote.
We will be back next week with part 2 of the conversation with Jack and Tobi Graham. Until then, as always, to all our regular listeners and our new ones, thank you so much for listening, and
keep a good light.
Let it shine, this little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, this little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, this little light of mine.